Welcome to Wisdom Unveiled. I'm so excited to be kicking out our first deep dive with you.
It's going to be a fascinating journey.
It really is. Before we get started, a really quick note. The wisdom that we'll be kind of exploring, unpacking today, comes from a series of conversations between two brilliant Iranian philosophers.
Dr. Dinani and Dr. Larijani.
Exactly. And just keep in mind these discussions have been translated, so, as anyone who has tried to, learn a language or translate something knows something always gets lost, right?
It's inevitable.
So, apologies for any discrepancies. Okay.
All right.
Let's dive in. Over the next 40 episodes, we're going to be exploring the insights of Dr. Dinani and Dr. Larijani on a whole bunch of different topics.
Yeah, they cover so much ground.
They really do. But today we're starting with Rumi.
Great place to start.
Specifically, the opening lines of his masterpiece, the Mathnawi. It's just amazing to me how much depth is packed into just these first few lines. We're not just reading poetry here.
Oh, absolutely not.
We're going on a journey into its deeper meaning.
The kind of meaning that might shift your whole perspective.
Exactly.
It's fascinating how Rumi just doesn't waste any time. He starts with a command. Listen.
Right.
It's like he's grabbing us by the shoulders and demanding our attention.
Yeah, it makes you lean in, right, and think, listen to what? What's so urgent that he needs to grab our attention, right from the start?
And I think that's precisely the question that Rumi wants us to ask. He's inviting us to consider what it really means to listen. It's more than just hearing the words. It's about being receptive, being open, and willing to kind of shed our preconceived notions.
Yeah.
To really understand.
So it's almost like a prerequisite for the whole journey ahead.
It is.
We need to learn how to listen before we can even begin to grasp the wisdom that Rumi's offering.
Absolutely. And I think the next line gives us a clue as to what we should be listening for.
Okay.
Rumi compares us, human beings, to the May.
The reed flute.
The reed flute, yeah.
Yeah. I remember the first time I read that, I was like, a flute? What does that have to do with anything?
It does seem random, yeah.
It felt so random.
But it's actually a brilliant analogy. Dr. Dinani pointed out that the knee is a very simple instrument. It's just a hollow reed, and yet it's capable of producing such beautiful, haunting music. But it can only do so when the breath flows through it freely.
So you're saying the knee is like a metaphor for the human being?
Exactly. Rumi's suggesting that we too are like hollow reeds, capable of expressing great beauty and meaning, but only when we allow ourselves to be empty, to be vessels for something greater than ourselves.
Okay, so the nay is hollow, and we need to become hollow too. What does that actually mean, in a practical sense? What are we emptying ourselves of?
Well, Dr. Larijani had some interesting thoughts on this. He talked about how we often get clogged up with our own thoughts, desires, attachments, all those things that keep us focused on the me instead of the we.
Right.
If you will, Rumi's saying we need to let go of all that to create space for the divine breath to flow through us.
It's like we're clearing out the clutter to make room for something more meaningful, something more beautiful.
Yes, and Dr. Dinani added that this process of emptying ourselves isn't always easy. It can be painful to let go of the things that we cling to, the stories we tell ourselves, the identities that we've built. But it's in that letting go, that surrender, that we discover our true potential.
So it's almost like a paradox. We have to become empty to become full. We have to lose ourselves to find ourselves.
That's the beauty of Rumi's wisdom. He's constantly challenging our conventional ways of thinking, inviting us to embrace paradox and see the world through new eyes.
Yeah, and he did that so beautifully through this image of the nay.
He does.
He goes on to describe the nay having two mouths, one visible, one hidden. What's he getting at there?
This image really resonated with both Dr. Dinani and Dr. Larijani. They saw it as a representation of the dual nature of our existence. The visible mouth, they explained, represents our connection to the physical world.
Okay.
The world of form and appearances, the world we experience through our senses.
So that's the mouth that's constantly chattering, taking in information, trying to make sense of the world around us.
Exactly, but then there's the hidden mouth. This one represents our connection to the unseen world, the realm of the spirit, the world of intuition and direct knowing.
So it's like we're receiving input from two different sources. The visible mouth feeds our intellect, and the hidden mouth nourishes our soul.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And I think the challenge, as Rumi sees it, is that we often get so caught up in the noise of the visible world that we forget to listen to the whispers of the hidden world.
Right.
We become deaf to the music of our own souls.
That's such a powerful image. We're surrounded by this symphony of meaning, but we're too busy looking at the sheet music to actually hear the music itself.
And it's the music, as Rumi suggests, that carries us back to our source, back to the nisten.
To the reed bed from which we were cut.
Exactly.
Right, and we talked about how that separation from the newsstand symbolizes the soul's journey.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm wondering, if we're like nays, what's the music that we're meant to play in the world?
That's a great question, and one that I think Rumi invites each of us to answer for ourselves, but maybe we can find some clues in the way he describes the knees sound. Dr. Dinani pointed out that the ney music is often characterized by its simplicity, its purity, and its melancholic tones.
I can hear that. There's a certain sadness to it, a longing, a yearning.
Exactly. And Dr. Larijani suggested that those qualities reflect the soul's own longing for a reunion with the divine. So perhaps the music we're meant to play is the music of our own hearts, the expression of our deepest longings, our yearning for connection, for wholeness, for love.
So it's not about achieving some perfect state of enlightenment or trying to become something we're not. It's about embracing our own vulnerability, our own longing, and allowing that to become the music that guides us back home.
That's a beautiful way to put it. It's about recognizing that the journey itself is the destination. The longing, the yearning, the searching, that's all part of the music.
Yeah. You know, it's amazing to me how much depth and meaning is packed into just these first few lines of the Mathnawi.
Absolutely.
It's like Rumi is giving us a whole roadmaps for this spiritual journey right from the start.
He is. And it all begins with that simple yet profound command, listen.
And perhaps the first thing we need to listen to is the sound of our own longing, the mournful song of the ney that echoes within each of us.
Perhaps that's the key that unlocks the door to Rumi's wisdom. It's in the recognition of our own longing that we begin to hear the whispers of the divine, the music that guides us back to our true nature.
This has been such a rich and insightful exploration, and I feel like we've only just scratched the surface of Rumi's wisdom.
We have, and that's the beauty of it. Rumi's poetry is like a bottomless well, always offering fresh insights, new perspectives, and deeper levels of meaning to those who are willing to dive in.
Before we move on, I want to hear from you. What has stood out to you the most from our discussion so far?
You know, what strikes me is how Rumi immediately introduces this idea of duality, the two mouths of the ney, the need to empty ourselves while also becoming instruments of something greater. It's like he's setting a stage for a journey of paradox and discovery.
You're right. And it makes me think about how we often try to simplify things, to find like easy answers and clear-cut solutions. But Rumi's suggesting that the spiritual path is more about embracing the mystery, the contradictions, the inherent complexity of existence.
And that's where the real people lies, isn't it? In the space between the known and the unknown, where the heart and the mind meet, where the visible and the invisible dance together.
Yeah.
That's the space where Rumi invites us to play.
Speaking of playing, Rumi tells us that the knee cries out because it's been cut from its reed bed.
Yes, and that image of separation resonated so deeply with both Dr. Dinani and Dr. Larijani. They saw it as a metaphor for the soul's journey. Yeah, they both agreed that the ney represents more than just a musical instrument. It symbolizes the human being, specifically the human being who's aware of their spiritual origin, their connection to something beyond the material world. And that awareness, that yearning for the divine, that's what gives rise to the ney's mournful song.
It's like the soul recognizing its separation from its source, cries out in longing. And that cry, in a way, is the beginning of the spiritual journey.
That's beautifully put. And Dr. Larijani made a fascinating connection to the work of Ibn Arabi, a renowned Sufi mystic. He pointed out that Ibn Arabi also uses the image of the reed flute to represent the human soul.
So this idea of the ney as a symbol of the soul's journey is woven throughout Sufi mystical tradition.
Yes, and it speaks to a universal human experience, this feeling of separation, this longing for something more.
Okay, let's delve a little deeper into this idea of separation. What did our philosophers have to say about what that separation actually means? Is it a physical separation or something more symbolic?
Well, Dr. Dinani was quick to point out that Rumi isn't suggesting we were literally cut from some heavenly reed bed. He's using poetic language to describe a more profound existential separation.
So it's more about a separation of consciousness, a forgetting of our true nature.
Exactly. Dr. Larijani elaborated on this point, drawing on the concept of forgetting that's central to Sufi mystical thought. He explained that when the soul descends into the material world, it becomes veiled, as if it has forgotten its divine origin.
So we fall asleep and forget who we really are?
That's a great analogy, and the ney's song, according to Rumi, is a reminder of that forgotten truth. It's a call to awaken, to remember our connection to the divine.
Now, we can't talk about Rumi's ney without addressing the powerful imagery of the two mouths. Dr. Dinani had some particularly insightful observations about that symbolism.
Yes, he did. He emphasized that Rumi is pointing to the dual nature of human existence. We have a foot in both worlds, so to speak. One mouth, the visible one, represents our connection to the material world.
The world of form, of sensory experience.
Exactly. And the other mouth, the hidden one, represents our connection to the unseen world, the realm of the spirit.
So we're constantly receiving input from both worlds, but perhaps we're more attuned to the visible, the tangible.
That's where the challenge lies, isn't it? It's easy to get caught up in the demands of the physical world, the world of appearances. But Rumi is reminding us that we have this other hidden dimension that's just as real, just as important.
And that hidden dimension is what allows us to access true meaning, to connect with the divine.
Precisely. It's through that hidden mouth, so to speak, that the divine breath flows through us, allowing us to create beauty, to express love, to fulfill our spiritual purpose.
I love how Rumi uses such vivid, almost visceral imagery to convey these profound truths. It's not just intellectual, it's something you can feel in your bones.
Absolutely. And speaking of feeling it in your bones, Dr. Dinani made a fascinating observation about how Rumi viewed the human body itself. He pointed out that Rumi didn't see the body as separate from the soul. He saw it as an instrument of the soul.
So it's not about denying the body or transcending it. It's about using it as a vehicle for spiritual expression.
Exactly. And that ties in beautifully with the analogy of the ney. Just as the ney needs a skilled musician to produce beautiful music, the soul needs a healthy, balanced body to express its full potential.
I'm starting to see how Rumi's philosophy is so holistic. He's not separating the physical from the spiritual. He's weaving them together into a tapestry of meaning.
And that tapestry is woven with threads of both the seen and the unseen worlds. Remember, Rumi tells us that the ney was brought from the neystan, a place that represents the realm of the unseen.
Yes, and Dr. Larijani had a fascinating interpretation of what that neystan represents. He suggested that it symbolizes the primordial unity, that state of oneness from which all things emanate.
That's a powerful concept, isn't it? It suggests that we all originate from a place of unity, a place where there's no separation between the self and the divine.
And that our journey in this life is, in a way, a journey back to that unity.
Precisely. And the ney's mournful song, with its longing and its yearning, can be seen as a reflection of that journey. It's the soul's cry to return to its source, to reunite with the beloved.
I love how Dr. Larijani brought in the concept of the beloved. It adds another layer of meaning to Rumi's poetry, doesn't it?
Absolutely. In Sufi mysticism, the beloved represents the divine, the ultimate object of our love and longing. And the soul's journey is often described as a love affair, a passionate pursuit of union with the beloved.
Which makes the Ney song all the more poignant, doesn't it? It's the song of a lover separated from their beloved, yearning for reunion.
And that yearning, that longing, is what fuels the spiritual journey. It's what drives us to seek meaning, to connect with something beyond ourselves.
I'm starting to see how Rumi's poetry is so much more than just beautiful words. It's a roadmap to the soul's journey.
And it's a journey that begins with that simple command: listen.
We've talked a lot about what it means to listen in the context of Rumi's philosophy, but I'm curious to hear what Dr. Dinani and Dr. Larijani had to say about the practical implications of this idea. How do we actually cultivate that deep, attentive listening in our daily lives?
Well, Dr. Dinani emphasized that true listening requires more than just having functional ears. It demands a certain inner stillness, a willingness to quiet the chatter of our minds and truly open ourselves to what we're hearing.
So it's about silencing that inner critic, the constant stream of thoughts and judgments, and just being present with the sound.
Exactly. And Dr. Larijani added that true listening also involves suspending our preconceived notions and biases. It's about approaching what we're hearing with an open mind, a beginner's mind, as if we're encountering it for the first time.
That's a tall order in today's world, isn't it? We're constantly bombarded with information and opinions, and it's easy to get caught up in our own filters and perspectives.
It is a challenge, but it's a challenge worth undertaking. Dr. Dinani pointed out that cultivating this kind of deep listening has profound implications for our relationships, our understanding of the world, and our own spiritual growth.
So how do we actually begin to practice this kind of listening? Did they offer any specific techniques or exercises?
They did. Dr. Larijani suggested starting with something as simple as listening to nature. He recommended finding a quiet spot in nature and simply sitting and listening to the sounds around you. The wind rustling through the leaves, the birds singing, the water floating.
That sounds so peaceful. It's like hitting the reset button on our overstimulated minds.
Exactly. And as you listen, Dr. Larijani advised, try to resist the urge to label or categorize the sounds. Just allow yourself to experience them as they are, without judgment or analysis.
So it's about letting go of our need to control or make sense of everything and just allowing ourselves to be present with the experience.
Yes. And Dr. Dinani added that we can apply this same principle of deep listening to our interactions with other people. He emphasized the importance of truly hearing what someone is saying, not just waiting for our turn to speak or formulating our response in our heads.
That's so true. We're often so busy thinking about what we're going to say that we don't truly listen to the other person.
And when we don't truly listen, we miss out on so much. We miss out on the nuances of their words, the emotions behind their message, the subtle cues that reveal their true feelings.
It's like we're only getting a superficial glimpse of who they are, rather than seeing them in their fullness.
Exactly. And Dr. Dinani shared a wonderful quote from Rumi that encapsulates this idea beautifully. He said, "Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there."
Wow, that's powerful. It's like an invitation to step outside the confines of our judgments and meet each other in a place of pure presence and understanding.
It is, and that place of presence, that field beyond judgment, is where true listening begins.
This is making me think about the deeper connection between listening and understanding.
Yes, true listening is a prerequisite for true understanding. When we listen deeply, without judgment, we create a space for empathy, for compassion, and for genuine connection.
It's like we're dropping our defenses, opening ourselves to the other person's experience, and allowing ourselves to be touched by their humanity.
Beautifully put. And Dr. Larijani emphasized that this kind of deep listening is not only essential for our relationships with others, but also for our relationship with ourselves.
What does that mean, listening to ourselves?
He suggested that we often try to drown out the voice of our inner wisdom with external noise and distractions. We're so busy trying to keep up with the demands of the world that we lose touch with our own intuition, our own deepest needs and desires.
It's like we've become strangers to ourselves.
In a way, yes. And Dr. Larijani encouraged us to cultivate a practice of inner listening, of paying attention to the whispers of our soul. He suggested that this can take many forms, from journaling to meditation to simply spending time in quiet contemplation.
It's about creating space to hear that inner voice, the voice that often gets drowned out by the noise of the world.
Exactly. And when we learn to listen to ourselves, we gain access to a wellspring of wisdom and guidance. We discover our true passions, our purpose in life, and the path that leads to our highest fulfillment.
This is also profoundly insightful. I'm starting to see how listening isn't just a passive act of hearing. It's an active engagement with the world, with others, and with ourselves.
And it's an engagement that requires a willingness to be vulnerable, to open ourselves to what we might hear, even if it challenges our assumptions or makes us uncomfortable.
Which brings us back to the May, doesn't it? Its mournful song is a reminder that vulnerability, that willingness to feel and express our deepest emotions, is essential to the human experience.
And it's through that vulnerability, that willingness to be open and receptive, that we allow the divine breath to flow through us, creating something beautiful and meaningful in the world.
You know, listening to all of this is making me think about the power of sound itself. We often take it for granted, but sound has such a profound impact on our emotions, our thoughts, our very being.
Yes, it does. And Dr. Dinani delved into this topic quite extensively, drawing on both ancient wisdom and modern scientific understanding. He explained that sound is more than just vibrations in the air. It's a carrier of information, a powerful force that can shape our reality.
I'm curious to hear more about that. What specifically did he say about the power of sound?
Well, he started by talking about the ancient concept of nada Brahma, which translates to the world is sound. This idea, which originated in the Vedic tradition of India, suggests that sound is the fundamental creative force of the universe.
Wow, that's a big idea. So sound isn't just something we experience, it's the very fabric of reality.
That's the essence of nada Brahma. It suggests that everything in the universe, from the smallest atom to the largest galaxy, is vibrating at a particular frequency. And those vibrations create the forms and structures we perceive.
Just like a cosmic symphony, with every element playing its own unique note.
Exactly. And Dr. Dinani pointed out that modern science is actually catching up with this ancient wisdom. He cited the work of physicists who are exploring the concept of string theory, which proposes that the universe is made up of tiny, vibrating strings of energy.
So even modern physics is starting to recognize sound as a fundamental force.
It seems so. And Dr. Dinani went on to talk about the profound impact of sound on the human body and mind. He explained that our bodies are literally vibrating systems, and different sounds can influence those vibrations in various ways.
I've definitely experienced that myself. Certain sounds, like calming nature sounds or beautiful music, can have a very soothing effect on my body and mind.
Exactly. And Dr. Dinani pointed out that this is not just a subjective experience, it's backed up by scientific research. Studies have shown that certain types of sound can lower blood pressure, reduce stress hormones, and even promote healing.
That's fascinating. So sound can actually have a tangible impact on our physical and mental well-being.
Absolutely. And Dr. Dinani went on to talk about the role of sound in spiritual practices. He explained that many spiritual traditions around the world use sound as a tool for transformation and enlightenment.
I'm thinking of chanting and mantra recitation in various religious traditions.
Yes, and Dr. Dinani explained that these practices aren't just about creating beautiful sounds. They're about using sound to shift our consciousness, to connect with deeper levels of awareness.
So sound can actually act as a bridge between the ordinary, everyday mind and the realm of the spiritual.
That's the idea. And Dr. Larijani added that even listening to music can be a spiritual experience. He pointed out that music has the power to transport us beyond our usual thoughts and feelings, to connect us with a sense of beauty and wonder that transcends the mundane.
I know I've definitely had moments where music has moved me to tears or give me goosebumps. It's like it touches something deep within me that words can't quite reach.
And that's the power of sound. It speaks a language that bypasses the rational mind and speaks directly to the soul. This is all so incredibly insightful. I'm starting to see how sound is so much more than just something we hear. It's a fundamental force that shapes our reality, influences our well-being, and can even connect us with the divine.
And it's a force that Rumi understood and harnessed so masterfully in his poetry. He used the power of sound through the image of the ney to convey these profound truths about the human condition and the soul's journey.
Exactly.
Speaking of Rumi's poetry, we've been focusing on these opening lines of the Mathnawi, but I'm curious to explore other passages where he kind of delves into this power of sound and music.
Oh, there's so many. Rumi's poetry is filled with references to music rhythm and the transformative power of sound. He often uses imagery of musical instruments like the ney, the rabab, and the duff to convey spiritual truths and mystical insights.
What are some specific examples that come to mind?
Well, there's a beautiful passage in the Mathnawi where Rumi talks about the power of music to awaken the soul. He writes, "Music is the wine that fills the cup of the soul. It is the language of the heart, the voice of the beloved."
That's so beautiful. It really captures the essence of what we've been talking about, how music can bypass the rational mind and speak directly to the soul. I love that.
Yes. And in another passage, Rumi compares the human heart to a drum. The heart is a drum, and love is the drummer. When love beats upon the heart, it awakens the soul to dance.
That's a really interesting image. What do you think Rumi's getting at there?
I think he's suggesting that love is the force that animates the soul, that sets it in motion. And that motion, that energy, is often expressed through music and dance.
That makes sense. In Sufi mystical practice, music and dance are integral parts of the spiritual path, right? They're not just forms of entertainment. They're tools for transcending the ego, connecting with the divine, and experiencing the unity of all things.
Exactly. And a great example of this is the practice of sima, the whirling dervish ceremony, which is so central to Sufi tradition.
Yeah, I've seen videos of Sima, and it's absolutely mesmerizing. There's such a sense of grace and beauty in their movements.
It's truly captivating. And the whirling motion is not just random, it has deep symbolic meaning. It represents the soul's journey towards the divine, the shedding of the ego, and the experience of unity with the beloved.
So it's a physical embodiment of the spiritual journey.
Exactly. And the music that accompanies sima is an essential part of the experience. It creates an atmosphere of transcendence, helping the dervishes to enter into a state of ecstatic trance.
I'm imagining that the repetitive rhythmic nature of the music helps to quiet the mind and create a sense of altered consciousness.
That's a key element of it, and Dr. Dinani pointed out that the music used in sima often incorporates specific scales and rhythms that have been shown to have a profound impact on brainwave activity.
So it's not just about the beauty of the music, it's about using sound to create specific physiological and psychological effects. That's fascinating.
Yes. And Dr. Larijani added that the combination of music movement and focused intention in sima creates a powerful synergy that allows the dervishes to access higher states of consciousness.
It's like a carefully orchestrated ritual designed to facilitate spiritual awakening.
Precisely. And it's a testament to the profound understanding that Sufi mystics had of the transformative power of sound.
I'm curious, are there other examples of how Rumi uses specific sounds or instruments in his poetry to convey certain ideas or emotions?
Absolutely. For example, he often uses the sound of the rabab, a stringed instrument, to represent the yearning of the soul for the divine.
I can imagine that the rabab has such a plaintive, almost melancholic tone. It evokes a sense of longing and separation.
Exactly. And the duf, a type of frame drum, is often used by Rumi to symbolize the heartbeat of the universe, the rhythmic pulse of creation.
That's such a vivid image. It's like the duff's beat is a reminder of the interconnectedness of all things, the constant flow of energy that animates the cosmos.
And then there's the sound of the human voice, which Rumi uses in various ways to convey spiritual truths. He sometimes uses the voice to represent the divine call, the whisper of truth that guides the soul towards enlightenment.
That's a beautiful image. It's like a soft, insistent voice calling us home.
And other times, Rumi uses the voice to represent the soul's cry, the expression of its longing for union with the beloved.
This is making me think about how sound can be both a cause and a response, a way of both sending and receiving messages from the spiritual realm.
That's a beautiful insight, and it speaks to the dynamic nature of the spiritual journey, this constant interplay between our human longing and the divine grace that meets us along the way.
Listening to all of this is making me realize that Rumi wasn't just a poet. He was a master of sound, a sonic architect who used words and imagery to create a symphony of spiritual meaning.
And we as readers and listeners are invited to step into that symphony, to allow ourselves to be swept away by its beauty and its power.
I love that. It's like we're entering into a conversation with Rumi, a dialogue that transcends time and space, a dance of meaning that unfolds through the power of sound. And before we continue with this conversation, I want to check in with you. What's resonating most deeply with you about what we've discussed so far?
For me, it's the sheer depth and richness of Rumi's use of sound imagery. It's not just ornamentation, it's a fundamental part of his spiritual teaching. He uses sound to awaken us to the unseen dimensions of reality, to connect us with the divine, and to guide us on the path to enlightenment.
I'm right there with you. I'm also really struck by how Rumi weaves together the physical and the spiritual, the seen and the unseen, into this seamless tapestry of meaning. He's not asking us to deny the body or transcend the world. He's inviting us to experience the divine within the everyday, through the senses, through music, through the very act of listening.
And that, I think, is the essence of Rumi's message, that the divine is not separate from us. It's present in every moment, in every breath, in every sound.
And perhaps the key to accessing that presence is to cultivate that deep, attentive listening that he calls for in the opening lines of the Mathnawi.
Perhaps it is. And that's a challenge, but also a beautiful invitation, isn't it? To open ourselves to the symphony of the universe, to listen with our hearts, and to allow the music of the divine to flow through us.
We've been talking a lot about the symbolism of the ney and the power of sound, but I want to circle back to that opening line of the Mathnawi. Listen. Dr. Dinani brought up a fascinating point about the original Persian word that Rumi uses.
Ah, yes. He mentioned that the word is Beshno, which can be translated as both listen and hear, but he emphasized that there's a subtle difference between the two.
Okay, I'm curious. What's the distinction?
Well, hearing is a more passive act, simply perceiving sounds with our ears, but listening implies a deeper level of engagement and active attention and receptivity.
So Rumi is calling for something more than just passively absorbing sounds. He's asking us to be fully present, to engage with what we're hearing on a deeper level.
Exactly. And Dr. Larijani added that Beshno also carries the connotation of obey or heed.
That's interesting. So it's not just about listening, it's about responding to what we hear, about taking action based on the wisdom we receive.
Yes. And this brings us back to the idea that Rumi's poetry isn't just meant to be admired for its beauty, it's meant to be a guide for living a roadmap for the spiritual journey.
So listen, is not just a poetic flourish, it's a call to action, an invitation to embark on a path of transformation.
Precisely. And that path, as we've been exploring, is paved with sound, with music, with the whispers of the divine that speak to us through the heart of creation.
Dr. Dinani made a really insightful observation about the significance of Rumi starting the Mathnawi with this command to listen. He suggested that it sets the tone for the entire work, framing it as a journey of spiritual awakening that begins with attentiveness and receptivity.
That's so true. It's like Rumi is saying, before we even begin, you must first learn to listen. Only then can you truly hear the wisdom that I have to share.
And that wisdom, as we've seen, is woven into the very fabric of sound itself.
And it's waiting to be discovered by those who have ears to hear.
I love how you put that. It's like Rumi is inviting us to become sonic explorers, to attune ourselves to the symphony of the universe, and discover the hidden melodies of the divine.
And perhaps that's the true purpose of poetry, isn't it? To awaken us to the music of existence, to help us hear the whispers of our souls, and to guide us on the path to wholeness and harmony.
This has been such a rich and insightful conversation. I feel like we've only just scratched the surface of Rumi's sonic world.
We have, and that's the beauty of it. Rumi's poetry is a treasure trove of wisdom and beauty, and each reading reveals new layers of meaning. Each encounter with his words is like tuning into a different frequency, a different vibration of the divine.
And that brings us back to the core of this whole deep dive, the meaning behind Rumi's words. It's so easy to get swept away by the beauty of his poetry, but we can't forget that there's a depth of understanding he's inviting us into.
It's like he's hidden these jewels of wisdom within these intricate verses, and it's up to us to unearth them.
So how do we do that? How do we move beyond simply appreciating the beauty of Rumi's words and actually extract the deeper meaning that lies within?
Dr. Dinani and Dr. Larijani offered some really helpful guidance on that. They both emphasized that understanding Rumi requires a shift in perspective, a willingness to move beyond the limitations of our logical linear thinking.
It's like we need to learn a new language, the language of the heart, the language of intuition.
Exactly. And Dr. Larijani pointed out that one of the biggest obstacles to understanding Rumi is our tendency to approach his poetry with a Western analytical mindset.
So we try to dissect his verses, break them down into their component parts, as if we're solving a mathematical equation.
Precisely. And in doing so, we miss the essence of what he's trying to convey. Rumi isn't interested in providing neat, logical explanations. He's using poetry to point to something beyond language, beyond concepts, beyond the grasp of the rational mind.
This is reminding me of something Dr. Dinani said earlier about how Western philosophers struggle to grasp the concept of meaning, like they're trying to capture lightning in a bottle to define something that's inherently elusive and intangible.
Exactly. And Rumi understood this. He knew that the deepest truths can't be conveyed through logic or argumentation. They must be experienced, felt, intuited.
So how do we shift our perspective? How do we cultivate that intuitive understanding that Rumi's inviting us into?
Dr. Larijani suggested that one of the best ways to approach Rumi is through the lens of love. He emphasized that Rumi's poetry is at its core a love song to the divine, an expression of the soul's longing for union with the beloved.
So we need to read his words with our hearts open, allowing ourselves to be moved by the beauty and the passion of his language.
Exactly. And Dr. Dinani added that another key to understanding Rumi is to embrace ambiguity. He pointed out that Rumi's poetry is full of paradoxes, contradictions, and multiple layers of meaning.
He's not giving us easy answers or neat, tidy explanations. He's inviting us into a mystery, a journey of exploration and discovery.
Yes, and that's part of the beauty of it. Rumi isn't trying to spoon-feed us pre-digested truths. He's giving us the ingredients and inviting us to create our own feast of meaning.
So understanding Rumi is less about finding the right interpretation and more about allowing ourselves to be touched, transformed, and inspired by his words.
Exactly. And Dr. Larijani shared a beautiful analogy to illustrate this point. He compared reading Rumi to gazing at a starry night sky.
Okay, I love that analogy. How does it relate to Rumi's poetry?
Well, when we look up at the night sky, we see countless stars, each one unique and beautiful. We can try to count them, categorize them, map their positions. But in doing so, we miss the awe-inspiring beauty of the vastness and mystery of the cosmos.
So it's like we're getting lost in the details, the individual stars, and forgetting to appreciate the grandeur of the entire constellation.
Precisely. And it's the same with Rumi's poetry. We can analyze his metaphors, dissect his verses, try to pin down his meaning. But in doing so, we risk missing the transformative power of his words, the way they can lift us out of our ordinary consciousness and connect us with something greater than ourselves.
It's about letting go of our need to control, to analyze, to understand everything. It's about surrendering to the mystery, allowing ourselves to be swept away by the beauty and the power of Rumi's words.
And in that surrender and that letting go, we might just find that the meaning reveals itself not through our intellect, but through our hearts.
I love that. It's a reminder that sometimes the most profound truths can't be grasped with our minds. They must be felt with our souls.
And that feeling, that intuitive understanding is what Rumi's poetry is all about. It's a doorway to a deeper experience of reality, a realm where the boundaries between the self and the divine dissolve, and the heart becomes a vessel for the infinite.
This has been such a profound exploration, and I feel like we've only just begun to scratch the surface of Rumi's wisdom.
We have, and that's the beauty of it. Rumi poetry is like a bottomless well, always offering fresh insights, new perspectives, and deeper levels of meaning to those who are willing to dive in.
You know, as we're wrapping up this deep dive into Rumi's opening lines, I can't help but think about how much wisdom is packed into those seemingly simple verses.
It's astonishing, isn't it? It's like a seed that contains the blueprint for an entire forest.
And we, as readers and listeners, are like gardeners tending to that seed, nurturing it with our attention, our open hearts, and our willingness to listen deeply.
And as we do so, the seed begins to sprout, to grow, to blossom into a garden of understanding that enriches our lives and nourishes our souls.
I'm so grateful for the opportunity to delve into this wisdom with you and with our listeners. It's a reminder that even centuries later, Rumi's words still have the power to awaken us, to inspire us, and to guide us on the path to a more meaningful life.
And the journey doesn't end here. We have so much more to explore, so many more layers of meaning to uncover, so many more frequencies of wisdom to attune ourselves to.
That's what I love about this show. It's an ongoing exploration, a never-ending quest for understanding, a celebration of the human spirit's infinite capacity for growth and transformation.
And it all begins with that simple yet profound command.
So as we conclude this deep dive into Rumi's opening lines, we leave you with this question to ponder. If we are, as Rumi suggests, like May flutes, what music are we meant to play in the world? What might be blocking the divine breath from flowing through us? And how can we clear those blockages to allow our true song to emerge?
Those are powerful questions and ones worth carrying with us as we continue our journey through life. May we all strive to become instruments of peace, love, and wisdom, allowing our unique melodies to contribute to the harmony of the universe.
Beautifully said. And until our next deep dive together, may you continue to listen, to learn, and to grow, always seeking the deeper meaning that lies within the symphony of existence.
And may we all continue to be guided by the wisdom of Rumi, the master of sound, the poet of the soul.